by following a stay in Iraq strategy, we will still have 130,000 American troops in Iraq 1 year from now. That's unacceptable and not in our national interest. I believe it is more dangerous to keep U.S. troops in Iraq than to withdraw them from that country and redeploy them to fight the real threat of Islamic terrorism. Drawing down our forces in Iraq will probably, perhaps almost certainly, be accompanied by increased violence, at least for some time. As I said, there are no good options here. But our choices today are not good, better, best. They are all problematic, including staying the course indefinitely. The central question that General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker tried to answer was, is the surge working? I think it's the wrong question. The more relevant question is this: is a continued U.S. military presence in Iraq in the national security interest of the United States? And I believe we need a dramatic change in our Iraq policy, and also an entirely new strategic approach in the Middle East. The repeated deployments in Iraq have strained the U.S. military. We need to reset our armed forces to have them rested and ready for future threats. Instead of refereeing a religious civil war in Iraq, our troops should be concentrating on the real threat to the nation's security by rooting out and eliminating militant Islamic terrorism. We need a regional security strategy that, under a multinational process that involves Iraq and all of its neighbors, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, and yes, even Iran and Syria. It should include a multilateral conference on political reconciliation, much like the ones for the Bosnian peace accords, and a plan to solicit donations from Iraq's oil-rich neighbors to help with Iraq's reconstruction. Because of Iraq, we have too long ignored significant national security interests. For example, Iran's nuclear program is a major concern and should be a top national security focus for us. But right now the conversations going on between Americans and Iranians are all just about stability in Iraq. The best way to apply pressure on Tehran is through concerted multinational action. But unfortunately, the resentment we create through our Iraq policy harms our ability to marshal the cooperation of our allies. Second, resolution of the Israel-Palestinian problem provides another critical example. It would reduce a major source of friction in the Muslim world and leverage enhanced cooperation against militant Islam. But our preoccupation with Iraq has limited our attention and compromised our position as an honest broker of a lasting peace. And then, of course, there's Al-Qaeda, which the intelligence community recently found has become resurgent in its home base in the Afghan-Pakistan border region. Osama bin Laden's reemergence this week reminds us that 6 years after 9/11, he remains free and able to recruit new terrorists by building on the resentment of our involvement in Iraq. These initiatives and others will continue to be compromised as long as we have U.S. forces bogged down in Iraq. Just as our presence has created a culture of dependency on the part of the stalemated Iraqi government, it has also created stagnation within the region by providing an excuse for Iraq's neighbors not to take responsibility for regional security. As long as we remain in Iraq, they know stability is our problem. And frankly, some of them, in their long-term national interest, are not all that excited about having us create an Iraq, a stable Iraq with a permanent military American presence. Once we announce we are leaving, we gain diplomatic leverage with countries that have a self-interest in stability in Iraq. And given the circumstances today, Congress must lead the way out of Iraq. No amount of recommendations by blue ribbon panels, cajoling by elder statesmen, or non-binding statements from Congress will move this intransigent president from his position. We simply can't trust that he will do the right thing when he is committed to policies that have proven to be disastrous for our country. The only realistic way To overcome the President's resistance is for Congress to set a firm, binding deadline to get U.S. troops out of Iraq. I simply have come to the conclusion that nothing but the force of law will compel the President to comply. I have voted repeatedly for a binding timeline to end U.S. military involvement in Iraq, and I will continue to fight for this until we succeed. Real deadlines work. Senator George Mitchell helped negotiate the accord that ended the conflict in Northern Ireland, and he has said he learned about the importance of setting deadlines from his experience in the United States Senate. On March 25, 1998, he gave the parties a 2-week deadline to reach agreement, or the peace process would end. The Good Friday Accord was the result. Without a firm deadline, it never would have happened. As you know, I am a candidate for the United States Senate. Susan Collins and I have served in Congress together for 11 years. She and I both grew up here in Maine. We both deeply love our state and our country, and we both work hard on behalf of our constituents here in Maine. But elections are about choices, and choices have consequences. Susan and I have faced the same choices on the Iraq War. She has voted consistently to support the President's policies. I have voted consistently to change the President's policies. She now advocates a plan to, quote, change the mission for fighting the war that could keep 100,000 Americans in Iraq indefinitely. I opposed this war from the outset. I voted against it in 2002 and predicted, correctly as it turns out, that it would create more resentment and hatred of America in the Islamic world and make us less, not more, secure. For 2 years, I have advocated for a deadline to end the war and put the Iraqis on notice that they must resolve their differences and take charge of their own security, because we are leaving. The young servicemen and women from Maine I met at Combat Outpost X-Ray in Iraq, Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, and other locations in both countries make us all proud. They are talented, dedicated, and show more courage than I can possibly convey. They've done everything they've been asked to do, and it has been a job well done. They were sent to Iraq to topple Saddam Hussein, and they did it swiftly and decisively. Because of bad judgment, inept management, and disastrous decisions by the President and past Congresses, our troops are now caught in the middle of a religious civil war with no end in sight. The people of Maine, I believe, don't want another compromise on how to fight the war. They want leadership to end it. They want leadership to plot a new course in Iraq and throughout the region as the best chance to bring some stability to that war-torn area. And they want leadership to redirect our attention to the real threat to our national security, militant Islamic terrorism. The war in Iraq poisons every aspect of our foreign policy and undermines our important domestic priorities. We can wait no longer for success from a policy that the President conceived erroneously, conducted ineptly, and stubbornly refuses to change. We must change direction to protect the future safety and prosperity of the American people. Thank you.